Today we're going to talk about Bridge of Clay. So I know it's definitely snowed in other parts of Canada, but I'm in like one of the most, like the southern tip of Canada. So today is the first day we have experienced snow this year. Third time's the charm. I'm like trying to figure out how to talk about this book without spoiling it. And then as I'm in the spoiler part, I'm talking about it as if I'm trying not to spoil it. So like, I'm gonna try this again. So this is the non-spoiler part of the video, so you can watch and I'll let you know when I start getting into like high spoiler stuff. So Bridge of Clay essentially is the story of 5 brothers whose mother passes away and their dad leaves them. And when the story starts, like when the narrator starts the story, it's the oldest brother, Matthew, is writing the story and he's narrating, but he's telling Clay's story. And Clay's story involves telling like Michael and Abby and Penny and Carrie. There's a whole bunch of other characters, and he tells like their stories. One day their dad shows back up and he wants the boys to come and help him build a bridge, and the main character, Clay, who is like the story that you're following, is obviously the only brother who will go and help his dad. That's not a spoiler. That happens quite early on in the book, so not like ruining anything for you. And then from there, it just things ensue. There is also a couple of like love stories, and I don't mean like romance, like they're like, these are like love stories. They're slow building and they're pretty and they're sweet, and it's just like, oh, my heart. I loved this book so much. I don't know how to talk about it without spoiling it because I want people to read it for themselves. But I totally understand why so many people like DNF this book. I totally get it. It's written super strange. Like the opening line is like in the beginning, but before the before. Like it's very confusing. And then there's like the youngest of the 5 boys has all these pets, and they all have these really obscure names. And like, I feel like every single thing that's written in this book comes up again somewhere later. Like it's like there's a trail of there's like a trail of breadcrumbs left throughout this book, and I kept hitting like points, and like I would hit a point in the story and I'm like, oh, and it was just like all these like aha moments, or like these really like heart-wrenching moments, or like something that you read that you didn't even know was a breadcrumb. I can't say breadcrumb. That was a breadcrumb later on just breaks your heart and just pulls it out and stomps on it. Like, I loved it. So essentially, I'm trying to like explain it without ruining, because there's so many like layers to this book. This book had so many moments where my heart was big, and my heart was broken, and my heart was happy, and my heart was sad, and I just felt so many emotions while I was reading this story. So if you did DNF Bridge of Clay, maybe it just really wasn't for you, but if you can get through it, I feel like the story is worthwhile. And again, I read reviews, some people gave it like 200 pages, and they just weren't into it. I totally get that. But if you just quit in the beginning because it's weird, I say if you own the book, give it a second chance and try to at least make it to like 100 pages in. Because honestly, the first time I cried was page 76. If you still hate it, get rid of it. It's fine. Obviously, this book I think is going to be very polarizing. I think it's almost becoming popular to hate it because so many people just think it's so weird. But the more I read, the more beautiful I thought the story was, and the way he wrote it, I don't know, hopefully it's picking it up on camera, but all the blue tabs are things that either made me cry or like made my heart hurt. All of the pink ones, some of them are things that made me cry or made my heart really happy. And the yellow ones are like things that just made me smile. The green is just like quotes in general that I enjoyed. So that is how I tabbed it up. There are so many tabs. I wrote lots of like little notes and stuff in here. But essentially, like, I feel like going into Bridge of Clay, I read the synopsis. I'm not going to read it again because I know what it's about now. But I feel like when I first read it, it was kind of confusing, but I was also, because I loved The Book Thief and I just loved Marcus, like the way Marcus Zusak wrote that book, I was pretty much down to read whatever he wrote next, even though I didn't quite get what it was about. Like, I knew that it had to do with 5 brothers and, like, their estranged dad. That's about all I knew going into it. But it was so good. And the way he would describe something as, like, there was the blonde and there was the bones, or something like that. And I can't think of exactly where that was, but it's like, or if that's the actual quote, but he would say things, or like, there were the bones and the metal and the this. Like, it made sense in the story. It doesn't make sense as I'm saying it. It's probably just making you all go like, yeah, that's why I hated the book. But I feel like those were the things, like, they made everything hit harder, and it was just like, there was such a build-up to everything that happened. But I kept reading, and the more I read, at first I thought the writing got less weird, and I think I commented on someone's thing saying it got less weird. I don't think it really did get less weird. It was just less foreign when I was reading it. So, like, I kind of understood the way he was writing it, and then after that, everything just, like, went through my mind perfectly fine. And, like, the stories were told in such a slow way, but not, like, so slow that I was feeling like it was dragging. It was just like, I was so invested in everyone's stories, and I was so invested in Clay, and I just, So anyway, I am going to move into the spoiler part, and, like, I guess I'm just going to talk about some of my favorite things. There really wasn't anything I didn't like about this book. Like, the beginning I thought was weird, but I totally appreciate it now that I finished the book, and, like, I might read this again someday just to see how it reads as, like, now that I know everything that's going on and I'm used to it. I think it's something I would enjoy more than once. Honestly, I'm worried that anything that I say next will be spoilery, so if you have read Bridge of Clay, stick around, because I, like, want to talk about all the things that I loved about this book, and I just want to talk about it because I feel like, it was just so good. So if you haven't read it, I suggest you read it, or if you don't want to read it, just keep watching, but #spoilers ahead. I don't even know where to start. Like, I guess I'm going to start from the beginning. I have a whole bunch of tabs, and they're everywhere. But essentially, Clay is the character, like, we all know this. He's the one who would wake up and, like, remember that his dad was gone, and he would go searching. And he would run, and he would run, and he would run, and, like, that was his thing. He would just run through the streets looking for his dad, hoping that he was going to come back home. And all in all, I think he left when Clay was 13, and Clay goes to help him build a bridge at 16, I think, unless he was a little bit younger, but I think he leaves at 13. And so I think, like, the time he was gone was only about 3 years, but I feel like 3 years is, I mean, it's not 30 years, but it's still such a long time, especially when all your kids are as young as they were when he left. And so Clay's nickname is the Smiler. He's quiet. I don't know how to explain Clay. He's just written in a way that I loved him so much. Like, I loved his character so much, and I thought he was so sweet. And, I mean, they're rough and tumble boys. Like, they fight each other. They beat the crap out of each other. Like, but there's just something about Clay who just has such a big heart. And honestly, I think they all do. Like, when you really read into them, like, to me, they all were loving people. Like, they weren't people who went out and, like, got in trouble with the law and stuff. They were just, like, rough and tumble and, like, products of their neighborhood, I guess. Like, they just were kind of crazy, and I guess bringing up 5 boys just would be crazy. There is a part in the book, so Clay is a runner, and then he ends up going into, like, the races and stuff. He was doing all those races where people are trying to stop him, and his brothers are betting on him, and, I mean, what do you expect out of a whole bunch of teenage boys who have been left to their own devices and are being essentially raised by, like, their 18-year-old brother? Like, you can't, I feel like these are the kind of characters that you would expect to come out of something like that. In the book, it says, Clay always found a way. To him, there was no end of this, or a loss, or a time, or the money. It didn't matter how much they hurt him. they couldn't hurt him, or how much they held him, they couldn't hold him. Or at least they couldn't quite hurt him enough. So this is like in context here, that he's running a race and they have boys set up as obstacles trying to take him down to see how long it takes him to run the race with all of these obstacles. But that line where it says they couldn't quite hurt him enough, it just, like, I don't know, it kind of made me think, like, my brother passed away, like 22 years ago now, 21 years ago. And sometimes I wonder, like, when things happen, like, I feel like they should affect me more than they do. And then, like, reading that line, I'm kind of like, well, maybe it's just that, like, certain hurts are so grave and so huge that, like, other things just, they don't touch it. It's like they just can't quite do what that did to you. Oh, no, now I'm getting teary. But, like, lines like that, like, I just felt like I really connected with the book, at least by this page, and I just really loved, like, certain phrases like that. And then I'm just kind of flipping through because I can't remember exactly where everything was. And then, like, his dad comes back, and I think his dad comes back, around, this is page 92. So, essentially, like, when their dad comes back, all the brothers are really, really angry, and the dad wants them to come and help him, and obviously they all say no, except for Clay. And it says, the thing is, these days I'm convinced Clay knew he had to do it. And it's just the way that Clay's written is, like, he's just such a forgiving person. At least, like, that's, reading it, that's kind of how you see it. But now that I've read to the end and I know what actually happened, because obviously I thought for this entire story that the dad had something to do with it. And all the, like, the brothers referred to him as, like, the murderer, or at least the oldest one did, but it wasn't their dad. Like, obviously you get to the end and you know it's Clay, and so it's not even, like, I thought it was, like, a story of forgiveness, and I guess it is from the father's standpoint because he came back. From Clay's standpoint, it's not a story of forgiveness, which is what I thought it was while I was reading it. It's almost a story of remorse. Like, he did this thing for his mom out of love, and I'm not even going to touch base on whether or not the ethics behind it. Like, I feel like that's not something I want to talk about. But, like, what he did, I can understand why he did it. And what he was trying to accomplish and, like, what he was trying to do for his mom. And then you think back on it and, like, I think he was, like, a 13-year-old I think he was 13 when she passed away. And so, like, to think that a 13-year-old kid helped his mom do that. Like, it broke him. It completely broke him. And no wonder nothing could touch the hurt, because it broke him. And then, oh man, I cried through this book so much. But then he's like, so he goes off to build the bridge with his dad, and he keeps going back and forth, and his brothers are so angry at him, and, like, literally his oldest brother, like, beats the crap out of him when he first comes home. But it's like, he knows that he needs to take this, and he knows he needs to, like, right his wrongs, and eventually everyone finds out his story. And it's like, he just, oh my goodness, like, his story is so sad. And then there's, like, the story of Abby and Michael when Abby leaves. And I knew that they weren't going to stay together because you already knew about Penny. But that love story, like, it broke me. And then the story of Penny and her dad, like, when Penny has to leave her dad and, like, sees him for the last time, and, like, she's on the train and she finds the books. My goodness, like, I fell apart. I was just so sad because, like, her dad did everything he could to get her out, and she knew she would never see him again. And then she meets Michael, and they fall in love, and then she dies. And I'm just like, my heart can't handle. My heart, like, and most of the book is, like, counting down to the time that she dies. Not most, but a lot of it is counting down, like, the story of her falling apart. And then Clay meets Carrie, and you're, like, so rooting for this. Like, it's like this really beautiful romance, even though they're young. They're, like, 16 or 17 and 16 or something. And so she's a jockey, and they are, like, they have, like, all these rules, and they, like, only meet on Saturdays because she's busy all week, and if she loses focus, like, she could fall from a horse and all this stuff. And then one night they spend together, and finally they take it. I mean, it's not graphic. It's like the way it's written is just so beautiful and sad. And it's the next morning she falls off the horse, and his brother comes to get him from, like, where he's building the bridge with his dad. And oh man, when Carrie died, and then, like, so you know she died, but then they go back and he keeps telling all these stories about before she dies and, like, how they met and all these things. And it's just, it makes you love her even more, which then makes the fact that she died hurt even more. And it's so awful. And then he goes back and finishes the bridge with his dad, and, like, oh man, Achilles, like, I don't know why, but this stupid mule, whenever they would talk about him, it just made me giggle. Like, they gave this mule so much personality, and it was just so funny. And so, like, the part where, like, the mule is standing on the bridge in the water, and, like, the mule and all the animals are named after characters from, I think it's the Odyssey, which is a book that their mom loved. Like, I feel like this story just had every single thing was important to something else, and there were all these little hidden, like, secret jokes or, like, secret stories and stuff, and just everything, like, came together. And then after the bridge was done, and it talks about how Clay goes off, I was, like, bracing myself because I was convinced that when they sent their dad, or when Matthew sent his dad off to go and find Clay, I was convinced that he was going to come home and say, like, he found him, but he was dead. Or, like, that he had committed suicide, or, like, something. Like, that's what I thought was going to happen. And I thought it was going to be, like, a super tragic, horrible ending. And I was just going to be so sad. But literally the entire last portion of the book, I cried. It was, like, off and on. I was, like, in tears and not, and in tears and not, and in tears and not. And it ended up being a really happy ending. And I loved, like, I don't always need a happy ending, but in this book, I loved it. I absolutely adored this ending so much. It just, like, there was just so much. So many times in this book that were just so sweet. And then there's a point in the book when they refer to, it's 7 beer penny or something like that. And finally near the end of the book, you hear the story. Like, I was waiting for them to tell it, and then he did. But there's a part where, like, the mom who's Penny, she's trying to get Michael to go to a bar, and she's, like, near the end, and you can tell she just wants, like, a last hurrah. Like, she's just so done, and she just wants to go and have some fun, because she's just been suffering for so long. And then it says, like, that Michael was standing back on the porch, and it says, and I guess it's one of those moments, you know? You could see how hard he loved her. His heart was so obliterated, but he found the will to work it. He was tired, so tired, in the porch light, just bits and pieces of a man. And it's like, this man just loved his wife so much, and he's been watching her just fall apart. And he's just so broken and watching her die in slow motion. And he knows that they shouldn't do this because it's going to be awful for her. But in the end, Clay ends up, the dad goes out and he sits on the grass, and they're all walking away, and Clay runs back and picks him up and, like, kind of walks with him to bring him back. Like, Clay is, like, always the person who goes back. He's, like, the leave no man behind kind of a guy. There's a part I'm, like, trying to find, because I know I marked everything with tabs. It's just remembering where it was. So after Carrie dies, Clay goes to visit her, I don't remember what he's called, but, like, the manager, or, like, her boss, essentially. And he goes to meet him. And I guess that guy had told Carrie to cut all the baggage out, which included Clay, and he didn't want them together because he knew she would get distracted. Sorry, that cut off. So Clay goes to visit Carrie's, like, manager or boss or whatever. This guy, like, didn't even want her with Clay. Because he wanted her focused, and he didn't want her to get distracted, and she wanted to be with Clay anyway, and they had all these rules, like I said. Clay goes to apologize to this guy because he feels such unbelievable guilt that she died because of him. Like, he thinks that it's his fault that she died. And, like, I literally have a blue tab and a pink tab because I just couldn't decide So he goes up and he apologizes and he says it's all his fault. And Ennis says to him, "You have no idea what I've seen jockeys get up to over the years, and they did it." He was suddenly so empathetic for things worth much less than you. And it was just like, when I read that, I just, like, it was just another one of those things, like, he's just such a special person, and like, oh my goodness, there's just so many good things in this book. And after Penny dies, so when Penny dies, it takes a little bit for Michael to actually decide to leave. It's like, they talk about how he was slowly fading. And it says, "Early on, our father was called to the schools, and he was a perfect post-war charlatan, well-dressed, clean-shaven, and in control. 'We're coping,' he said, and the principals nodded. The teachers were fooled, and they could never quite see the abyss in him. It was hidden beneath his clothes. He wasn't like so many men who set themselves free with drink or outbursts and abuse. No, for him it was easier to withdraw. He was there, but never there. He sat in the empty garage with a glass he never drank from. We called him in for dinner, and even Houdini would have been impressed. It was a slow and steady vanishing act. He left us like that, in increments." The way that he explains, like, grief and how he faded away before he was even gone, like, it was like he left before he left. And then there's a line in the book where Michael takes Clay to the city, Featherton, where he grew up, or the town of Featherton. And I know this is just a line I thought was, like, perfectly written. And Clay says, "It's not quite how I saw it, but I guess things never are." And his dad says, "We never imagined things perfectly," said Michael, "but always just left or right. Not even me and I used to live here." And I don't know why, but just the way he phrased things in this book, I think it was beautiful. I loved it. And I'm not usually one who enjoys, like, poetic things. I don't usually, like, see that side of stuff. But like I said, I just loved this book. And I definitely think that more people should give it more time. Because honestly, so many people say, like, I quit at, like, page 50. And I'm like, that's literally when it starts. That's like just after all the weirdness. Like, maybe not all the weirdness. The whole book is interesting, eclectic, if you will. But it hurt my heart so much. And I thought it was going to be a 5-star read before I started it. I just, like, could feel it. And then I started it and I was like, oh no, this is going to be, and I pushed through and I was like, nope, every single thing was written with purpose. That's the way I'm trying to phrase it. Everything in there was, like, written with purpose. Anyway, this video is probably getting super long and I'm gonna have to edit it. But if you did manage to make it all the way to the end, leave a comment down below. Let me know, like, your favorite parts, what you thought of the book, whether you loved it or hated it is totally fine. I just, like, would love to have a conversation about this book where I can, like, hear other people's opinions, because I just think it's so good. I just feel like it needs to be talked about. Anyway, I will talk to you all soon. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already and click the bell, and I will talk to you all soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!